Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Ding. Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our best-selling new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. I am in a very silly, giddy mood. Watch out.
What, we were inhaling something this morning?
It might be the construction that is going on and the air purifier is going a little crazy. Maybe it's something in the air. I don't know. Or it's I'm really hungry.
Then this could be a really entertaining episode.
I know. And it's going to be because we have a really awesome guest and friend, Mike Gustafson, who is the president of Search Discovery. And Search Discovery is a data transformation company that believes great things happen when companies use their data with purpose to drive measurable business impact, which I love. So, Mike, I'm so excited that you are here. And let's get started.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
How excited are you since you're
I like the giddiness. It's putting me at ease. So it's great.
Good. We want this to just be, like a coffee conversation. And if we knew how to bring podcast equipment, we could have met at the coffee shop. And because you're actually here and local.
You should have seen her yesterday lecturing at the School of Law at Georgia State. And I had to tell the audience, you may not think that she's a lawyer because she doesn't have a law degree, but boy, if you have to debate, quarrel, or disagree with her, look out.
Mm-hmm.
Watch out.
It was fun. All right. Kick us off.
Okay. Well, why don't we get started by telling us about how you got to where you are today?
I mean, I got my start in software development. So my background is as a computer science major, economics. Worked for some startups, worked for nonprofits. Was very fortunate to find a role at a pretty fast growing web development shop pretty early in my career, and was, given lots of opportunities by a lot of great people. I was with that company for almost 13 years, and we grew from 40 people to almost 1,500 people. And I really ended in a role of leading technology teams. I realized pretty early on I was less good at building the stuff and more helpful at creating opportunities for people who were good at building the stuff. And so I found myself more in leadership roles of technical teams. And our team was, building everything from e-commerce sites to mobile applications. And then was fortunate to meet the founder of Search Discovery about almost 10 years ago now. Right after we had exited, after Search Discovery had exited a product to Adobe in the analytics space, a tag management platform called Satellite. So I joined right after that to really help us take advantage of the opportunities. And so that was really fun to go from having been part of something really big and fast growing, lots of acquisitions, to come back to something pretty small and kind of help shape in a little bit more firsthand way the future of the business. And so we grew really as focusing on analytics, moving into business intelligence. And then, our vision has really evolved to be kind of end-to-end services helping companies think about how to use data in a purposeful way that drives the outcomes they're actually hoping for. And so certainly as we've done that, we've spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about privacy and all the many implications of that. So a little bit about how I got here.
Mike, before we dive into some of the privacy conversations, can you share an example of what that end-to-end data transformation might look like for a client?
For sure. I think a lot of times customers get too focused on just one part of the broader data and analytics ecosystem. So it's, in the past 10 years, a lot of that's been, let's just collect all of the data, as much of it as we can, without regard to how we're going to use it or how we're going to manage or govern it. Or they focused on, let's just do lots of analysis. Our view is you really have to think about four things in the whole life cycle. You have to have a plan. You need a strategy. What are my objectives and how is data going to help enable and empower the organization to achieve those? Then you have to really think about the collection aspect. How do I collect the right data in the right way, handle all the issues that, we're going to get into some of those about thinking about privacy and why do I have it and how do I govern and manage that? And then it's about how do I use it? And it's not just, a lot of times it's just thinking backwards, it's measuring historical performance. And so it's really helping customers think about how do you use it in a more forward thinking way, driving hypothesis driven testing and learning programs. And then last is really activating that. You go through all this work, you get all the data, you measure everything. For us, the ultimate goal is how do you activate that to drive better customer experiences, better personalization, provide greater insights to your customers or to the people in your business who are making decisions. And so kind of wrapping all of that is that, governance and privacy, but we really have worked hard to build out a model and capabilities that help customers make sure they're thinking about all four of those aspects. Why am I doing it? Do I have the right data? Am I using it and teaching people how to use it responsibly and thoughtfully? And then how do I actually make that work inside of the company?
Well, one of the reasons I was so excited to have this episode today is I'm not bashful to say that the intersection of marketing and privacy is my favorite part. And marketing has really been at the forefront now. For a number of years, marketers weren't always welcoming to the privacy universe, and whether they like it or not, now they're here. And it's really been a key part of what regulators are focusing on, what many of the laws are focusing on. And you're talking to a lot of different clients as part of the transformation journey you just shared. What are you hearing from them as their biggest challenges in trying to do some of their activities in a privacy-friendly way and comply with these laws?
I think there's two big challenges, and then maybe a third we could talk about that's specific to healthcare. But I think in general, people are struggling to get proactive. There's not tons of budgets or money allocated to privacy programs just yet. So you have a lot of small teams, or it's thrown onto the responsibility of existing, data and analytics teams, or just to a legal team. There's often lack of clarity of who's even really responsible for thinking through this. And so a lot of the companies we talk to are still in this wait and see type of mindset. They're waiting until something terrible happens or see if something happens in their particular niche industry or a competitor of theirs. And we think that's a kind of dangerous approach for them. We also see, I think that's related to why we see enforcement ramping up, because they're a little bit tired of people proactively engaging and complying with these laws. And so, that's why I think you see so much happening with, California funding an entire enforcement arm and, Europe doing these regular checks on GDPR cases. And so optimistically that will help companies focus more on it, give more budget so people can be proactive, because we think that's what's really important, is having a proactive strategy, starting at the very beginning of, hey, here's the data I already have, is, thinking about it from a zero party strategy, and then let's layer in, but do it in a very thoughtful way. And I think a lot of companies, it's hard to go back to that and kind of start over. So that's one, is I just think they're having a difficult time being proactive. Part of that, I think, is around the data collection piece. It's really difficult, and vendors aren't making it particularly easy for most marketing teams to understand the interplay of, even if I have all this stuff working in my consent platform, it doesn't necessarily pass down to how the tags are firing on my particular analytics tool. And the interplay between vendors' tools is really complicated. And we see a lot of people struggling to understand that. And it's causing a lot of challenges for them of, being not collecting enough data or important data that they could in a responsible way, or just collecting stuff that they shouldn't be, which is, we'll talk about that more later. A great example of that is just consent mode in Google Analytics. People don't really understand what it's actually doing or how it's working or how it interplays with your consent management platform. And so we see that as that's a constant conversation of helping people think through that relative to their specific needs and their customers. So those are the two big challenges, just being proactive and then understanding the interplay of the different vendors and what it really looks like. And then in healthcare, we see kind of a different behavior. People are being almost a little rash in their response to things. Recently, there was a HIPAA bulletin about Google Analytics in particular not being HIPAA compliant. And so we saw all these customers just shut all tracking off. So now all of a sudden these marketing teams had no data whatsoever about what was happening, and they didn't really have a good plan of what they were going to do. So we think you need to be somewhere in between that, proactive, certainly cautious and thoughtful, but not maybe overreacting.
On that Google Analytics healthcare example, for the people who didn't just shut it off, or maybe those who shut it off, are they starting to move a little bit towards the middle? Is there anything that you can share about where that middle ground is?
Yeah, it varies. The reality is Google Analytics isn't HIPAA compliant. It's a tool that's very pervasive, amongst hospitals in particular. It's a great example because that's where there's been some challenges about that tool. And so some of them have turned it back on, but in more limited fashions and trying to be very thoughtful or use consent mode and try to anonymize as much as they can. Others are looking for HIPAA compliant tools, but there's not a lot of great digital analytics tools that are fully HIPAA compliant. And so I think what we're trying to help some people navigate is how to use some of those tools, but send the data other places, like to, your own data warehouse or own data storage on a system that is HIPAA compliant, right? Because a lot of it has to do with where the data is actually resting and being stored. And so I think people are looking at hybrid solutions. So it's a mix depending on the risk tolerance of a particular hospital or the size or magnitude of the marketing teams and their specific goals, in this particular fiscal year. So we'll see. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because even the bulletin is not it's not a legally binding thing. It's saying it's not illegal for them to do this or that there's fines. It's just a word of caution. And so I think rightfully so, healthcare companies are trying really hard to be protective of that data. But I don't think there's a singular clear answer that's emerged yet. I think it's been very situational.
We might have to come back and do a whole healthcare episode, because I think there's so much that we could cover there. But we'll move on. So many topics.
So search discovery
healthcare, even the pharmaceutical side too. Sorry, Justin. Okay. Looking at kind of the broader life sciences world, I think there's some really interesting and unique challenges that they face. Sorry, Justin.
No problem. So Search Discovery recently conducted a survey of nearly 300 companies and their CCPA compliance. Can you tell us how you did that and what are some of the interesting findings that would be of interest to our audience?
Yeah, the team was really interested to see, with the updates coming in the California Privacy Rights Act and the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, were people making changes? Could we see a difference? So we did a big survey of about 300 companies across a bunch of industries who all had likely customers in those audiences, and looked at what they had in December. And then, did they make changes going into January? And then it really just gave us a view of back to what we were saying before, how proactive are people being? How compliant are they with these rules? And what are the risks? And really, how could we provide some insights or guidance to people generally to make sure that they were not putting their business at risk, but also just missing the opportunity that I think implementing some of these requirements provide in how they communicate and engage with their customers. So we looked at really 6 categories. We looked at disclosure, banner user experience, functionality of the banners, global privacy control compliance, actual policy updates. Did they add the right things into their privacy policies? And then we looked at opt-out linkage. And so, we had our team go through, we looked at all those companies and found some pretty disappointing, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure if disappointing is the right way. Surprising results. I mean, it's clear there's still incredible opportunity for people to work on their compliance. There's a lot of people across all those things way out of compliance. Less than half of companies had any sort of consent management capability, feature, platform, anything of those 300 sites, which is pretty surprising, actually, at this stage of where we're at with all these things. And then when you get into looking at things like looking at the specific checkpoints from the text around banner user experience or banner functionality, I mean, in general, it was less than 30% of people were compliant with the new regulations or the directions of where regulations were going, which is pretty shocking, particularly when you look at banner functionality. And this is the place where we see people have all sorts of problems. It gets back to what we were talking about before. The technology and what the vendors are doing is confusing and can be a little bit convoluted. And so we saw lots of people where even if I didn't consent, you would still see lots of people firing tags and measuring behavior afterwards. Same is true with global privacy control. When that signal was coming from the browser, actually 93% of companies did not properly detect that and take appropriate action on stopping data collection, afterwards. So that was pretty surprising. Same kind of thing in privacy policy language and opt-out language. It was, roughly 25% of those 300 companies were in line with what the policies, either in Virginia or California, were encouraging people to do, or out of compliance with just placement of the links, those sorts of things. So I think it shows that, as much as 300 companies is a subsection of the whole population, people are still waiting to see, and they're kind of playing a little bit of a Russian roulette game. I don't know if that's an appropriate term, but they're not investing ahead of time to make sure they're being thoughtful about this and communicating that thoughtfulness to their customers. They're just like, well, we're gonna, roll the dice and hope we don't get fined and get caught up in any of the enforcement rules.
It will be interesting to see. I don't know if you have a plan to come back and do this in sort of the August timeframe, because there's a lot of companies who opted not to do it by January and instead are looking towards July because they were looking at effective versus enforcement date and feel like, oh, they have extra time.
No, that is our plan, is to do it in the fourth quarter. We'll kind of wait. We'll give people all the way till the fourth quarter, and then we'll go take a look again. And we heard that even from a lot of the customers and companies that we're talking with, is it's a prioritization issue. It gets back to budgets. It's like, okay, I have these other things that are more important right now. I'm likely not going to fall under the enforcement deadlines. But the reality is it's going to take them longer to do it and resolve it. So, my prediction is we won't see that much progress by the end of the year, because I think people might start those projects and engagements, but they're going to continue to be deprioritized until they see somebody in their industry that looks like them, that has a similar customer base, start to incur fines or, have other issues related to it. So I think we still have a long ways to go before the majority of companies are going to prioritize it. We have some who are. So I think we have a couple clients who are so focused on it, and it's having very positive impacts. Much like what you talked about in the book, they're taking such a customer-centric view, and it's helping them build trust with their customers. And I think that's incredible. But that is the rare majority of at least people we're talking to. It's not that they don't want to, it's they're just not able to with the way their budgets and funding works right now.
So, Mike, as a follow-up question, given all of your experience with software development, data has been in the lifeblood of your career as well as the companies that you've dealt with. Given some of the findings that you were just summarizing, do you have any thoughts around, the culture? Do you think part of this is because companies understand that they collect data, but they don't really think about or even focus on the responsibilities that are starting to go with it now, especially with these proliferation of privacy laws, but also not understanding, and we wrote about this in the book, that how you treat someone's data is by extension, essentially how you're treating them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's multiple camps inside most companies. I think marketers have become more attuned to that and care a great deal about it, as well as data teams. But I think the business teams, the commercial side of the business, tends to still overshadow that. And there's still, I think, a lack of understanding of the value it can have if you focus on this, or the risk you need to avoid amongst, I think, leadership teams. It still hasn't risen to one of the most important things. I think people will pay some lip service to it, but in terms of committing budgets and training and education, which it takes a lot of. I mean, it hasn't been made easy. As you well know, the laws are complicated and they're hard to understand, and it's hard to understand if it applies to your unique situation. And with so many of them, that matrix set of puzzles, it takes a lot of time and investment. And so until the budgets are there, I think it'll be hard for people to take it seriously. 2 or 3 person teams that have these other jobs, it's just not enough time for them to figure it out. So I think at least amongst professionals in the marketing space and business intelligence teams or data teams, technical teams, I think they're taking it seriously. They understand the importance of it. I think they are struggling still to get the right support and budgets and time allocated to it and other resources.
You talked before about Google Analytics, and I want to talk about Google Analytics again, but let's this time go to the other side of the pond and talk about what's happening in the EU, where several countries there don't really like Google Analytics either. And was curious if you can share what you're seeing companies do in response to this. What I've been seeing is some companies are still just using it because there's not really another alternative that they like and they want to completely move to, and having two seems kind of complicated. But genuinely curious to see the kinds of conversations and what you're hearing from your customers and prospects.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing. We're definitely seeing people continue to use it because they don't have other options that help them. Or again, it depends on if you're talking to to a multinational company who operates in lots of different geographies, and they are trying to have this synthesized view of all their programs across borders. Or, if it's smaller companies that only operate in, just in the EU, for example. We definitely have seen people turn it off in certain countries, but not across the entire footprint, of the EU, and are exploring with kind of rolling their own solutions with using parts of it and pumping the data. I mean, a big part of the issue, right, is the shipping of the data back to the US. That's kind of the fundamental problem. I mean, there's more to it than just that. But so a lot of them are really watching what's going on with the European Union, US data privacy framework, and trying to see, how that's shaping up. But I would say most people are like, hey, maybe we should pull back, but they're still waiting to see, right? They're still, I think it's the same as we see in the US relative to California and other states. It's a risk reward trade-off. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know, I'm going to lose a lot of insights that are important to driving growth on the business. And until I know that there's real teeth behind some of these things, then I'm going to, play it a little loose. I think I would say in general, that's what we're seeing. More of that than people shutting it down. There are people shutting it down for sure, but not a lot of them.
I appreciate you sharing. I think it's very fascinating and will continue to be a very common question I get asked almost all the time. what to
Yeah,
think about it.
I mean, I'm sure you deal with it too. It's tricky because you want people to do the right thing. That's the whole point of a lot of these laws is to help people be thoughtful about the individuals and their rights and flip that. It's even good for you as a business to think about it that way. But it's such a big mind shift that's still having to occur across so many different audiences. I just think it's going to take, a while. And I think companies are going to have to see other companies incur more serious pain before they think it's going to happen to them.
Well, Mike, in that vein, have you witnessed any of your clients get subject to a ransomware or a data breach where you really have that convergence of cybersecurity and privacy laws? Because so many of the breach notification laws are triggered off of data that identifies someone specifically. So do you see that? Does that change behavior, or is it still, even after that, there's still reluctance for the reasons that you discussed?
I think it's a great question. Yes, we've had customers who've been subject to both of those challenges and were a little bit flat-footed in their ability to respond. They didn't have plans and processes in place. And I think I would say it's 50-50. Some have like, okay, we got to be serious about this. It's likely to happen again. And others are like, well, it's not going to happen again. It happened to us once. I think we're kind of out, which is such a weird, illogical response in my mind. So I think it's 50-50. I haven't seen that change people's disposition to privacy compliance, particularly relative to their websites and marketing efforts. I don't think people connect it quite the same way, even though I think they should. So I find that to be kind of fascinating. They might get more serious about security, but they're not thinking about I have all this data that's putting me at risk in the first place that makes me a target. I just don't see, because often I think those are still separate groups, right? You still have IT that's owning kind of one part focused on the security and less on the privacy, and your marketing and sales teams typically, and maybe HR focused on the privacy side. And, it's a constant, particularly from a software development career, like that's always a tension. Those groups don't necessarily, they become very territorial about who gets to do what or say what and control what. And they're not thinking about unified ways of how we solve this. So we've seen it, but I have not at least seen that really changing people's disposition on the whole towards what data do we collect in the first place.
People are always asking me, where should privacy sit? And I'm curious because you just talked about all these different groups and some work together and a lot don't work together. From a privacy perspective, when that comes up, who are the prime people that are in the room in those conversations?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a difference, I think, between who is today in those conversations and who probably should be in those conversations. I would say a lot of times we see it just be the legal function is the only function that's like in there talking about it. And they are most of the time saying, we don't really see this as applicable to us. It's actually pretty fascinating. That's most of particularly in our case with some of our customers, where we're advocating they should do certain things or encouraging them to do certain things. They're pushing back and being like, marketing teams will escalate it to legal, and legal's like, nope, we don't see that as a risk or applicable to us. Don't worry about it. Very rarely is IT in that conversation. Very rarely does it translate unless we really push the issue to kind of long-term issues of security or where's that data resting in the governance conversation. So I think it's usually too small of a group representing too small of a part of the company, and very infrequently, except at some of our most forward-thinking customers, do they have dedicated teams focused on privacy that are embedded across all functions of the business. So at our best customers, it's amazing, their commitment to it, where they have a whole team, they have points of view, and it's not just limited to marketing, it's limited to all data across the organization, from HR to marketing to IT, and they have team members embedded with specializations, and they have legal teams focused on policies relative to the specific nature of that data. And that's amazing. They're amazing to work with. It slows some things down, but once you kind of get the process in place, it actually makes things go a lot faster down the road, is what we're seeing. And that's exciting. But I would tell you, we work of the 200 clients we're working with today, like that's 5 companies. It is not a large majority of the companies that we're working with.
That is opportunity growth.
Absolutely. The worst case is it's just the marketer, right? And they're left to their own and they don't have support in the organization one way or the other to navigate or decide. And so again, it creates opportunities for organizations like both of ours to help come alongside and support them and educate them. But yeah, I think it needs to be across all functions of the business. I think the senior leadership teams need to think about it. Again, depending on the size of the business, that could manifest itself different ways. But I think every company of all sizes has to have somebody who's looking at it across every function of their business and understand, what they're really doing.
Well, we completely agree, which is why we're here having this conversation.
So, like I said, I think that's going to be one of the interesting things is how to help people change their mindset about it. And I think, I will give a plug for the book. It's one of the things I loved about your book was trying to help reshape people's thinking about this and not see it as just an insurance policy type of activity. Like I have to protect myself against fines, but to see it as a way to think differently about your customers and build trust with them. I think that's such a great thought. And I think that's probably the way I think that will make a difference for a lot of companies, but I think sadly, there's still going to be a significant number that will only be moved by the threat, right? And the stick of enforcement.
So when you're hanging out with your friends on the weekend and they ask you, how can I stop all these targeted ads when I'm hanging out, buying some Bulldog gear or something like that, what do you tell them?
I try not to hang out with people who ask me questions about work-related stuff when I'm not working. It's funny. I was talking about this with the woman who leads our privacy team, and she has a really unique point of view, which is she actually loves targeted ads because she finds when they're done well, it's very helpful to her finding the things that she wants. So like when it's done responsibly, she likes it. The short answer is if you don't want any ads as you're browsing, use Brave. Like that's probably your safest bet. It will give you some of the best ways to block ads and not be targeted. So if you really hate it, that's what I would tell people to do. Don't give anybody any information. Only go shop in stores with cash. You know what I mean? Like get delisted from the phone book. I don't know. Like you can do. I think it's more about.
Have a phone book still?
What about the AI camera?
But in all seriousness, think about the concept of a phone book. Someone printed the name and the address and the phone number and sent it to everyone in the town.
It's wild. Yeah, I think one of the things I've always liked about our conversations, Jody, is like there's no way, I don't think it's hard to avoid it and still get all the benefits that it offers us today. So it really is about learning how to do it responsibly and thoughtfully and with a high level of awareness, to protect what's important to you. And that's going to vary from person to person about how they feel about that and what information they care about being exposed or not be exposed. And it's going to depend on where you live and how you feel about your government. And, there's so many factors that go into it. But I do think people need to work hard to get more educated about it and educate, particularly when it comes to kids and not even kids, like even talking to my mom, like she doesn't know anything about this and she does all kinds of things that are probably not particularly helpful for her to be doing online. So I think it's, I would tell them it's not so much about the ads, it's about how are you thoughtfully sharing information about yourself and having a point of view for that for yourself and then picking the right tools and companies to work with.
When you're not building search discovery, what do you like to do for fun?
Besides not hang out with people who are going to ask you about targeted ads.
I mean, probably my biggest pastime is reading. I love to read. I have 4 kids, so most of my non-work life is about spending time with my kids and enjoying all sorts of things. We do a lot of hiking. I mean, that's what's great about being in Atlanta. You can do outdoor stuff almost all the time. Although April is kind of bad if you have pollen allergies, but reading, being outdoors, hanging out with my kids, those are my big pastimes.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining. If people want to learn more and get their hands on that survey results, for example, where should they go?
Yep, searchdiscovery.com. You can find it there. There's it's actually right now linked off the homepage, so you can find it, or you can just go to the blog section and you'll see it as kind of one of the most recent thought leadership pieces the team has put out.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing so many valuable insights with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.